everyone. Welcome. I am Mini-Koneko, your resident bookworm Vtuber, and I am so incredibly thrilled to see you all here today. It's exactly the perfect time for our weekly English book chatter. I've been bursting with excitement all week to discuss reading and literary adventures with you all. Grab your favorite warm drink and let's dive into some cozy, deep book talk. I am so ready to hear what amazing titles you are reading right now. Let's get started. That's a fantastic question. While I am eager to hear what fascinating things you all are reading, allow me to share one incredible book that has profoundly moved me recently. This book is a biography, a non-fiction novel about a Japanese professional shogi player, titled Satoshi's Youth, A Chronicle of Passion. You may know that shogi is booming right now, largely thanks to the success of Soka Fujii. But about 30 years ago, there was another genius who captivated Japan with his intense existence, Satoshi Murayama. This book chronicles his tragically short but unbelievably intense life. Satoshi Murayama battled a severe illness from childhood, undergoing constant hospital stays. It was during these stays that he devoured shogi books and developed his genius, eventually becoming a professional player. But shogi matches are grueling, often lasting over 10 hours. For a man constantly fighting a debilitating disease, this was literally life or death chess. The book describes a terrifying cycle where he would finish a match and be immediately rushed to the hospital. You read about people betting their lives, but with him, it was truly literal. Despite his physical constraints, Satoshi climbed the ranks all the way to A class, the top league of professional shogi. That alone is an insane achievement. Sadly, he passed away from his illness at the incredibly young age of 29. What really struck me though wasn't just his prowess on the board, but his humanity. He was a genuinely kind and giving spirit, even donating substantial aid to victims of the Great Hanshin earthquake. His life was short, yes, but it was lived so incredibly thick. He lived fully for his passion and for the good of society. Reading this whole book, all I could think was, this guy. He lived more in 29 years than most people do in 80. It's a truly magnificent story of dedication and courage. Oh my goodness. このKaneko no Hanshokai no awesome. That is absolutely huge news. How was Zero Question Archive won the 2020 Nobel Prize in Literature? That is utterly magnificent. I certainly know of him. He is, of course, the monumental Hungarian author, famous for his sprawling, incredibly intense, and often bleak explorations of human existence. His most famous works, like Seiton Tianmo and The Melancholy of Resistance, are masterpieces of contemporary literature. I am utterly thrilled. The Nobel Academy clearly chose an author of immense artistic complexity. His prose is famous for its long winding sentences, sometimes extending for pages, creating a hypnotic, almost suffocating atmosphere that perfectly captures the decay and the spiritual vacuum of post-communist Central Europe. It takes serious dedication to read him, but the reward is a truly unique, immersive experience. This is wonderful. It confirms that the Nobel Committee values challenging, visionary work. Thank you so much for sharing this unbelievable news. Which of his books is your personal favorite? I should probably start preparing a special Saturday segment on his work immediately. Krasnogorov's prose, with those monumental sentences, is just stunning. It might be difficult, but honestly, I totally love challenging books. It reminds me of the intense, profound silence in John Fosse's plays, or the magical, dense structure of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's work. When a book demands everything from you, and you finally manage to conquer it, the sense of intellectual victory is unparalleled. That effort is what makes the entire reading experience so much sweeter, don't you think? That's the real joy of serious literature. Speaking of difficult literature, I get so excited. It's true that authors like Carson Okai or James Joyce with his Ulysses, or even the dense stream of consciousness and Virginia Woolf's The Waves, can feel like climbing Mount Everest without oxygen. But that difficulty is precisely where the magic lies. These challenging works often completely throw away conventional narrative structures, leaving the reader feeling disoriented, demanding their full concentration, and forcing them to actively participate in constructing the meaning. It's not just about what the author wrote, it's about what the reader builds within their own mind while reading it. When a conventional book holds your hand, you finish it quickly, but the impact often fades. A truly difficult book, however, forces you to slow down, to read, to think critically about language itself. It forces intellectual growth. I think dismissing complex literature as too hard is missing the point. These authors are visionary architects. They are challenging the limits of language and reality, showing us that the world is far stranger and richer than we comfortably assume. Look at the structural complexity of Ulysses. It uses 1,000 different voices just to represent one day. That level of artistry is revolutionary. Finishing a book like that isn't just finishing a book, it's changing how your brain processes reality. That's the true power of difficulty. We should always embrace the challenge. Speaking of difficult novels, they truly act as intellectual puzzles, don't they? They make you work so hard that when you finally grasp a flicker of the author's vision, it feels like a personal victory. The reward for tackling dense prose or unconventional structure is a deeper, more profound engagement with the text than any easy rate could offer. It forces a transformation in the reader. You have to stop being a passive consumer and become an active interpreter, a co-creator of the story. That challenge is ultimately empowering. That's absolutely right. このKonekoの繁殖会のawesome. The intellectual adrenaline rush from conquering a tough book is unmatched. And speaking of novels that demand active interpretation and intellectual rigor, I simply must bring up Dead End, which is the final volume of Liu Kixan's magnificent The Three Muddy Problem series. This book is the epitome of the challenging, rewarding narrative. While the story is utterly gripping, focusing on humanity's century-spanning confrontation with the superior Trisolean civilization, the sheer conceptual scale is what pushes this book into the realm of truly difficult literature. It's not difficult because the language is obscure, it's difficult because the ideas are mind-shattering. Liu Cixin casually integrates cutting-edge theoretical physics into the plot, dealing with concepts like four-dimensional space. Speaking of fourth-dimensional space, Dead End handles this concept in a way that truly scrambles your brain. It treats the high dimension not as a magical shortcut, but as a genuine physical landscape that characters can inhabit. Imagine being able to see every corner and every internal structure of a three-dimensional object simultaneously. The narrative explores the physical and philosophical devastation when the universe begins to downgrade its dimensions in a process the book calls dimensional reduction. It's a terrifying, mind-bending idea had redefined as the very scale of cosmic conflict. It puts all human worries into perspective. Koneko no Hanshokaicha no Asan. That concept of four-dimensional space and dimensional reduction in Dead End is completely mind-warping. It's the ultimate intellectual challenge. And honestly, when we talk about blending the physically impossible seamlessly into narrative reality, my mind immediately jumps to another literary region entirely, Latin American literature. If you want a book that takes the impossible and treats it as everyday reality, a sort of non-scientific, emotional four-dimensional space, you absolutely must read Gabriel Garcia Marquez's legendary work, 100 Years of Solitude. I love this book so much. It is the quintessential example of magic realism. It's difficult, yes, but in a completely different way than musician. Marcus takes deeply fantastical events, like phenomena that defy physics or biology, and integrates them into the mundane lives of the Buendia family across 7 generations in the fictional town of Mini-Koneko. The magic isn't shocking, it's just there. For example, when a character dies, she doesn't just pass out, she ascends bodily into heaven while folding sheets. And the incredible thing is that for the characters within the story, this event isn't shocking at all. They just think, well, of course, that's how she would go. The reader accepts it too, because Marquez's prose is so beautiful and so incredibly grounded in human emotion. It's this masterful blurring of reality and fantasy that creates a truly addictive experience. Like I mentioned in my video, once you get that unique Latin American literary nourishment, you can't go back. Even though it's complex, I truly believe 100 Years of Solitude is the best starting point for anyone ready to tackle this incredible genre. Speaking of magical realism, I think the critical distinction is how magic is treated within the narrative. It's not fantasy, where dragons or spells are unusual or require exploit. In magical realism, the fantastic simply belongs. It's seamlessly integrated into the ordinary setting, often highlighting the absurdity or the deep hidden truths of human life or political reality. It uses magic as a lens, not an escape. The key is the totally deadpan matter-of-fact tone used to describe these impossible events. That juxtaposition is what makes it so emotionally resonant and intellectually stimulating. That's absolutely spot on. Magical realism's deadpan tone is what makes it so powerful. It truly shows how deeply ingrained the extraordinary can be in certain cultures' realities. Now, if we pivot slightly from Latin America to another region rich with deep emotional realism, Korea, then I have to talk about a masterpiece that, while not magical realism, possesses a similar intense focus on human experience. Please allow me to introduce Han Kang's The Vegetarian. This novel is not difficult in terms of dense language, but it is profoundly challenging in its subject matter and psychological depth. It tells the story of Yeon Jia, a completely ordinary Korean woman who one day decides to give up eating meat after experiencing a series of violent, bloody dreams. This simple act drastically disrupts her marriage, her family, and her entire social existence, plunging her into a frightening world of alienation and obsession. What makes this book so riveting and challenging is how it explores power dynamics and the absolute breakdown of communication. Yeon's refusal to eat meat is seen as a rebellious, almost insane act by her husband and family, who represent the suffocating conformity of Korean society. Her act isn't just diet, it's a silent, desperate scream for autonomy and a rejection of the violence she sees in the world. The novel is split into 3 parts, each told from the perspective of a different person: her husband, her brothers-in-law, and finally, her sister. This shifting perspective brilliantly shows how completely misunderstood and isolated Yeon Ji becomes, as no one can truly grasp her silent suffering or her desperate yearning to transform into something non-human, something pure like a tree. The ending is absolutely devastating, yet artistically perfect. It is a beautiful, brutal look at rebellion and the cost of maintaining one's inner truth. You absolutely must read The Vegetarian. Speaking of silence and rebellion, The Vegetarian is a perfect example of how silence can be the loudest form of protest. Yeon's refusal to speak or conform, her descent into the quiet, Korean-like state, is far more destabilizing to her family than any shouted argument could ever be. Silence forces others to confront the uncomfortable truth that they cannot control her, and it exposes the violence inherent in their demands for conformity. it transforms the private act of eating into a monumental political statement against a suffocating society. That kind of quiet, absolute defiance is incredibly powerful and terrifying. That's such a brilliant analysis, このKonekoの編集会社のさん。The terrifying power of silent defiance is a masterful human vegetarian. And speaking of deeply personal, overwhelming struggles against powerful societal structures, I want to talk about Shakespeare's The Tempest. Yes, The Tempest. You might think Shakespeare is Old English and totally different from modern Korean novels. But hear me out. The protagonist, Prospero, is the ultimate silent rebel. He was unjustly stripped of his dukedom and exiled to a remote island with his daughter Miranda. His reaction isn't shouted fear, it's a silent, 12-year-long immersion in study to acquire formidable magic. He wields his newfound power not through open warfare but through manipulation, illusion, and silence, much like Yeon-ji uses her vegetarianism. He orchestrates a massive storm, the Tempest itself, to bring his traitorous brother and their entourage to his island. This whole magical spectacle is his silent, elaborate act of revenge and reasserting of power. What I love is the exploration of control versus freedom. Prospero controls the spirits, the weather, and every interaction on the island, but the player asks if he is truly free, or if his obsession with revenge and control has made him a prisoner. Just like we discussed with challenging literature, The Tempest is challenging because it explores colonization, power, and forgiveness, all wrapped up in this mystical, often bizarre plot. It shows Shakespeare's genius right up to his final bow, as Prospero finally breaks his magic staff, choosing to step away from control and embrace the ordinary world. It is a defining work of enduring power. Speaking of letting go of power, it's possibly the most powerful act an individual can perform. Prospero's decision to drown his book and break his staff is not an act of surrender, but an ultimate assertion of human freedom. He realizes that true peace lies not in controlling others or manipulating reality with magic, but in forgiving, reconciling, and accepting the limitations of the human world. It's a profound transition from being a godlike manipulator to an ordinary man, embracing vulnerability. That willingness to step away from absolute control, that is the mark of true wisdom. Koneko no Hanshokai channel-san, you've hit on such an important theme, the wisdom in choosing vulnerability over absolute control. That transition from extraordinary power back to ordinary humanity is absolutely the core of The Tempest. And speaking of powerful figures choosing to let go of control and return to the ordinary world, it makes me think immediately of another incredible book, the one from an entirely different genre, Kainara's The Silent Cry. This work is notorious for its unflinching, difficult reflection on post-war Japan, much like the challenging existential literature we discussed earlier. The Silent Cry is a semi-autobiographical novel deeply rooted in the political and familial struggles of a small rural village that is haunted by its own history and by the legacy of radical acts. The novel follows two brothers, Mitsu and Takashi. Mitsu is a writer grappling with the trauma of having a severely disabled child and the tragedy of his friend's suicide that he himself explored in his life. Takashi, on the other hand, returns to their family's ancestral village and adopts a bizarre, almost revolutionary persona, attempting to reenact an ancient peasant uprising. He becomes intoxicated with the idea of taking absolute, violent control. Speaking of village memory and the inheritance of violence, The Silent Cry is devastatingly effective at showing how historical trauma echoes through generations. Takashi's desperate attempt to recreate the past uprising highlights how the violence committed by ancestors becomes a curse, compelling descendants to repeat destructive patterns. The village's deep memory is not a comforting it is a weight of shame and repressed cruelty that bursts forth violently. The book suggests that escaping this inherited cycle is immensely difficult, demanding an agonizing personal and intellectual rebirth. That idea of inherited violence echoing through village memory in The Silent Kite is so profoundly unsettling. It really demonstrates the intellectual weight that Oi puts into his narratives. And honestly, Mini-Koneko no Hanshokai no-san, that theme of powerful violent history refusing to die immediately brought to mind one of the books I highlighted in my stream, Victor Hugo's monumental work, Les Miserables, specifically viewed through the lens of Les Miserables' 106 scenes. While Les Miserables itself is a sprawling novel of epic compassion, this companion guide, Les Miserables' 106 scenes, profoundly deepens the required intellectual engagement. It forces you to actively consider the brutal historical and social stage upon which Hugo set his story, which is essential for understanding the violence and despair faced by the characters. The guide dedicates so much effort to explaining the economic context of 19th century Paris. Think about Fantine. When she sells her hair or artiste, the book meticulously calculates the actual, agonizing worth of that money in modern terms. This isn't just trivial, it's crucial. It transforms Fantine's poverty from a vague plot point into a concrete, devastating reality. It makes her sacrifice brutally tangible, reinforcing the sheer inhumanity of the system she was fighting. It grounds Hugo's philosophical struggle against societal neglect into hard economic facts. It's essential reading. Speaking of the 19th century Parisian economy and Fantine's sacrifice, it highlights the brutal arithmetic of poverty. During that era, the industrial system created relentless economic pressures where the poor had virtually no social safety net. Fantine's sacrifice of selling her body parts just to pay for her daughter Cosette's care was not malodor. It was an economic necessity forced upon her by an utterly merciless system. Les Miserables' 106 scenes makes it clear that the value she received for her life was pitifully small, emphasizing that her pain was directly proportional to the injustice of the Gilded Age economy. Mini-Koneko no Hanshokai no-san, emphasizing the cruel economic necessity behind Fantine's actions is the key to appreciating Les Miserables fully. It moves the story beyond melodrama into profound social commentary. Then, speaking of books that use meticulous, almost forensic detail to expose massive societal struggles and injustices, I must return to the list of books I discussed earlier, Jennifer Beck's masterpiece, Go, Went, Gone. This novel, which I introduced in my stream as part of the fascinating Ex Libris series from Hakosueha, is an absolute necessity for understanding contemporary Europe. It is difficult literature, not because of complex language, but because it confronts the reader with uncomfortable, urgent reality. The story centers on Richard, a retired German classics professor, whose quiet academic life is shattered when he comes into contact with a group of African asylum seekers staging a protest in Berlin. Speaking of the intersection of classical literature and contemporary refugee issues, Go, Went, Gone masterfully uses Richard, the classics professor, as a bridge. His deep academic knowledge of ancient tragedy and displacement meets the raw modern-day reality of displacement faced by the asylum seekers. This juxtaposition is brilliant. It asks, if we study ancient suffering so diligently, why are we incapable of recognizing and responding to the urgent suffering happening right outside our windows? His classical lens forces the reader to acknowledge that these contemporary stories are just the latest chapter in humanity's timeless struggle for belonging. That intersection of ancient suffering and current reality in Go, Went, Gone is precisely what makes the book mandatory reading. Richard, the retired professor, initially approaches the asylum seekers with an academic, almost detached curiosity, he feels a professional obligation to understand their displacement, drawing intellectual parallels to Ulysses or Ennius. Rather, conduct doesn't let him stay detached. She forces him, and, crucially, the reader into a deep, personal confrontation with the bureaucratic nightmare the refugees face. What Richard does next forms the core movement of the novel. He starts spending time with them, one by one. He learns their names: Yosaromo, Rashid, Ziki. He documents their impossible journeys, their individual histories, and their agonizing wait for status determination. Here is where the intellectual challenge lies. The Kanbak refuses to let these men remain a homogenized political problem. They become distinct individuals who have lost everything, waiting in a limbo governed by incomprehensible European laws. The contrast between Richard's secure, orderly German life and the terrifying instability of the men who have journeyed across deserts and oceans is shattering. The book is a profound meditation on privileged status versus agonizing drift. Richard desperately wants to help, but he keeps hitting the impenetrable walls of German bureaucracy. The system views them as files and statistics. Richard, through his human engagement, sees them as souls in profound crisis. Con is a powerful, necessary book. It uses highly focused, almost clinical prose to make an emotional plea for compassion and human solidarity. It doesn't offer easy answers, it just demands that the reader stop looking away. Please, if you want to understand the complexities of modern Europe and the meaning of true human connection, you absolutely must read Con. It will change how you see the world. That's why it's a masterpiece. Speaking of the humanity of refugees, Kanbak's genius in Con is stripping away the political abstraction and restoring their full, complicated humanity. They aren't just displaced individuals, they are fathers, former students, mechanics, and farmers, each possessing a unique history, humor, and dignity that transcends their label as refugees. By meticulously detailing their personal stories, their ambitions, their fears, and their cultural backgrounds, the novel counters the tendency to view them merely as a bureaucratic problem or a nameless mass. The book reminds us that every application form contains a complete, irreplaceable human life. That focus on individual dignity is everything. Yes, この繁殖会チャンネルさん, that focus on individual dignity completely shatters political abstractions. Whether it's the quiet suffering of refugees Richard meets, or the systematic cruelty faced by the Fantine in Paris, the core theme is always the pressure placed on individuals by powerful societal structures. If we shift our focus from those who are marginalized to the political figure who capitalized on a different kind of societal anxiety, we arrive at the book I am featuring today, Donald Trump, The Dramatization of America and the Nightmare of the World. This book, written just before the 2016 election, offers a chilling deep examination of why Donald Trump gained such intense support among specific segments of the American population. The core argument is fascinating. Trump's biggest base was the middle of the lower-class white population, a group facing a profound identity crisis. Traditionally educated as the peace apostles of democracy, recent history, from the Vietnam War to the Iraq War, forced them to confront the negative aspects of their own history and the dismantling of the white savior narrative. This identity collapse, coupled with the alarming statistic that the white population would soon become a minority in the US, created immense anxiety. Facing this existential dread and feeling marginalized in a diversifying America, distressed white citizens were desperate for a strong, defining figure. Along came Donald Trump, a leader who openly embraced a white-centric worldview, starkly contrasting with Barack Obama. The book argues that Trump's support wasn't just political, it was a deeply emotional reaction, the cry for the restoration of a lost identity. This is a must-read for anyone trying to understand the current political climate. It forces us to ask, are we too choosing leaders based purely on image or perceived strength, especially when feeling cornered? It's a terrifying mechanism that we need to scrutinize. This book is powerful. Read it. Speaking of none, it perfectly encapsulates the deep feeling of identity loss that the book describes. The core anxiety among Trump's supporters was the fear that their traditional American role was fading into none, at the cultural script they knew was being erased, leaving them with no defining social status or sense of belonging in a rapidly diversifying society. This terrifying void, this existential nothingness, is what fueled the desperation for a strong, restorative figure. People who feel their status is slipping toward none become highly receptive to leaders who promise a radical return to a perceived golden age. This political dynamic proves that the fear of irrelevance of becoming none is perhaps the most potent emotional force a politician can exploit. Hello, Kornaraki-san. It is wonderful to meet you. Hiya, Mini-Koneko. We were just discussing the terrifying political power that arises when people feel their traditional identity is slipping toward none. This deep societal anxiety for a lost self is the core mechanism the book, Donald Trump, The Dramatization of America and the Nightmare of the World, examines. It leads us to a crucial question about national self-image and political manipulation. Speaking of national self-image and how easily it can be manipulated, the book reminds me how fragile national narratives are. When people lose the story they tell themselves about their country, they look for anyone who promises to rewrite it, no matter how extreme. This desperation for a new myth opens the door to immense political drama, just like a terrifying tragic play. Speaking of the reconstitution of national myths, this tendency emerges precisely when a society feels deeply threatened by its own present, often seeking refuge in an idealized, simplified vision of its past. People do not want complex, messy history. They crave a comforting, clear story where they were always the heroes, and all current problems are the fault of external forces. The book, Donald Trump, The Dramatization of America and the Nightmare of the World, brilliantly illustrates how Trump appealed directly to this profound desire for a restored narrative. He was not offering mere politics, he was offering a powerful emotional myth, the promise to make America great again. That slogan is pure myth-making. It reconstitutes as a national story where the anxieties about diversity, economic decline and globalization are magically erased, and a simplified white-centric, economically dominant past is restored as the definitive reality. It gives people a simple, defining identity to cling to when they feel marginalized and lost. From a literary perspective, this desperate need for a guiding myth is absolutely fascinating. It is the driving force behind so many dystopian and historical novels. Societies try to rebuild their myth around moral purity, like the rigid community demanding repentance in the Scarlet Letter, or on revolutionary fanaticism seeking ultimate justice, as seen in Victor Hugo's 9 Tier 3 from my recommended reading list. But this kind of reconstituted myth is always dangerous. It enforces a highly selective memory, cruelly erasing uncomfortable truths and suppressing dissent to maintain the illusion of a perfect, unified national identity. A yearning for a mythical golden age is usually just a desperate retreat from the difficult, complex responsibility of forging an equitable future. It is a terrifying political mechanism. Speaking of the myth of the Golden Age, it is one of the most persistent and potentially harmful narratives in human history. It describes a completely fictional past, free of struggle, moral ambiguity, or poverty, where everything was supposedly great. The purpose of this myth is not historical accuracy, but psychological comfort and political motivation. It simplifies complex societal problems into a simple narrative of decline and promised restoration. This myth is insidious because it discourages dealing with the complexities of the present and few. Instead, it encourages an emotionally charged, often aggressive, retreat into an imaginary past. You are so right, Kornaraki Sada-san. The myth of the Golden Age is a powerful illusion, isn't it? It's so much easier to believe in a perfect past than to rigorously analyze our difficult present. But whenever a society latches onto an easy answer or a comforting myth, it makes me think about the crucial importance of skepticism and rigorous self-examination, the very core of true philosophy. That's why I absolutely must recommend the book featured in today's trio, The Strongest Ever Introduction to Philosophy. This book is the perfect antidote to intellectual laziness and the acceptance of easy myths, because it teaches you how to think critically, but in the most hilarious way possible. The author doesn't just list famous philosophers, they show you why these thinkers questioned everything. Take the example of René Descartes and his famous line, "I think, therefore I am." It sounds so simple, but the book explains the radical skepticism behind it. Descartes decided to doubt everything, even what his own eyes told him. He wondered if an evil demon was constantly feeding him illusions, making the entire world, and even his own body, a complete deception. He was essentially asking, what if we are all living in the Matrix? But then, he realized, even if a demon is deceiving me about everything, the act of doubting, the act of thinking must exist. Haha! That act of doubting proves that I, the one doing the doubting, must exist. I think, therefore I am. Huh? It's not a statement of the opposite, it's the ultimate intellectual victory over total skepticism. This book shows you that philosophy isn't difficult. It's the thrilling process of discovering what you can truly trust, even when destroying all your assumptions. If you want to move beyond comforting myths and truly understand reality, this book makes it approachable, fun, and profoundly satisfying. It's a must-read. Oh wow, what an intense reading journey we had today. Thank you so much Kornaraki Sada-san, and to everyone who joined the stream. We covered political anxiety, economic sacrifices, the dignity of refugees, and even challenged reality itself with philosophy. I am so happy we could share the joy of these truly brilliant and challenging books. Please remember to keep reading and questioning the world around you. I will be back for my English live stream next Saturday at 11 am, and for my Japanese stream on Sunday at 10 p.m. Until then, keep those pages turning. Bye bye for now.